Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing Food Rules by Michael Pollan. Big fan of Michael Pollan's work. I first started with Omnivore's Dilemma, moved on to In Defense of Food, and I would say Food Rules is a pocket version, rules-based version only of In Defense of Food. He takes some of the ideas he talks about in there and just distills them into these simple rules. There's quite a few in here. I'm only going to read from a few of the rules. Only a few, there's a bunch of tabs in here. But to give you some sense of what he's talking about. So, food rules. As a journalist, I fully appreciate the value of widespread public confusion. We're in the explanation business, and if the answers to the questions we explore got too simple, we'd be out of work. Indeed, I had a deeply unsettling moment when, after spending a couple of years researching nutrition for my last book, In Defense of Food, I realized that the answer to the supposedly incredibly complicated question of what we should eat wasn't so complicated after all, and in fact could be boiled down to just 7 words. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. This was the bottom line, and it was satisfying to have found it, a piece of hard ground deep at the bottom of the swamp of nutrition science. 7 words of plain English, no biochemistry degree required. But it was also somewhat alarming because my publisher was expecting a few thousand more words than that. Fortunately for both of us, I realized that the story of how so simple a question as what to eat had ever gotten so complicated was one worth telling, and that became the focus of that book. Whom did we rely on before the scientists and in turn governments, public health organizations, and food marketers began telling us how to eat? We relied, of course, on our mothers and grandmothers and more distant ancestors, which is another way of saying on tradition and culture. We know there is a deep reservoir of food wisdom out there, or else humans would not have survived and prospered to the extent we have. This dietary wisdom is the distillation of an evolutionary process involving many people in many places figuring out what keeps people healthy and what doesn't, and passing that knowledge down in the form of food habits and combinations, manners and rules and taboos, and everyday and seasonal practices, as well as memorable sayings and adages. Are these traditions infallible? No. There are plenty of old wives' tales about food that on inspection turn out to be little more than superstitions. But much of this food wisdom is worth preserving and reviving and heeding. That is exactly what this book aims to do. Food Rules distills this body of wisdom into 64 simple rules for eating healthily and happily. The rules are framed in terms of culture rather than science, though in many cases science has confirmed what culture has long known. Not surprisingly, these two different vocabularies, or ways of knowing, often come to the same conclusion, as when scientists really recently confirmed that the traditional practice of eating tomatoes with olive oil is good for you, because the lycopene in the tomatoes is soluble in oil, making it easier for your body to absorb. I've also avoided talking much about nutrients, not because they aren't important, but because focusing relentlessly on nutrients obscures other, more important truths about food. Foods are more than the sum of their nutrient parts, and those nutrients work together in ways that are still only dimly understood. It may be that the degree to which a food is processed gives us a more important key to its healthfulness. Not only can processing remove nutrients and add toxic chemicals, but it makes food more readily absorbable, which can be a problem for our insulin and fat metabolism. Also, the plastics in which processed foods are typically packaged can present a further risk to our health. This is why many of the rules in this book are designed to help you avoid heavily processed foods, which I prefer to call edible food-like substances. All right, so I'll read the rule number, and as you can see, some of the rules are longer, some of them are shorter, but if you spend an hour, you could easily make your way through this book. Rule number 2, don't eat anything your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. Imagine your great-grandmother, or grandmother, depending on your age, at your side as you roll down the aisles of the supermarket. You're standing together in front of the dairy case. She picks up a package of Go-Gurt portable yogurt tubes, and hasn't a clue what this plastic cylinder of colored and flavored gel could possibly be. Is it a food or is it toothpaste? There are now thousands of foodish products in the supermarket that our ancestors simply wouldn't recognize as food. The reasons to avoid eating such complicated food products are many, and go beyond the various chemical additives and corn and soy derivatives they contain, or the plastics in which they are typically packaged, some of which are probably toxic. Today, foods are processed in ways specifically designed to get us to buy and eat more by pushing our evolutionary buttons, our inborn preferences for sweetness and fat and salt. These tastes are difficult to find in nature, but cheap and easy for the food scientists to deploy, with the result that food processing induces us to consume much more of these rarities than is good for us. The great grandma rule will help keep most of these items out of your cart. Note, if your great grandmother was a terrible cook or eater, you can substitute someone else's grandmother. A Sicilian or a French one works particularly well. The next several rules refine this strategy by helping you navigate the treacherous landscape of the ingredients label. Rule number 4. Avoid food products that contain high fructose corn syrup. Not because high fructose corn syrup, HFCS, is any worse for you than sugar, but because it is, like many of the other unfamiliar ingredients in packaged foods, a reliable marker for a food product that has been highly processed. Also, high fructose corn syrup is being added to hundreds of foods that have not traditionally been sweetened: breads, condiments, and many snack foods. So if you avoid products that contain it, you will cut down on your sugar intake. But don't fall for the food industry's latest scam: products reformulated to contain no HFCS or real cane sugar. These claims imply these foods are somehow healthier, but they're not. Sugar is sugar. Rule number 6. Avoid food products that contain more than 5 ingredients. The specific number you adopt is arbitrary, but the more ingredients in a packaged food, the more highly processed it probably is. Note 1. A long list of ingredients in a recipe is not the same thing. That's fine. Note 2. Some products now boast, somewhat deceptively, about their short ingredient lists. Haagen-Dazs has a new line of ice cream called 5. Great, but it's still ice cream. Same goes for the 3-ingredient Tostitos corn chips advertised by Frito-Lay. Okay, but they're still corn chips. In such case, apply Rule 60 for dealing with treats and special occasion foods. I might have to skip ahead to Rule 60 here so we don't lose that idea. Rule 60. Treat treats as treats. There is nothing wrong with special occasion foods as long as every day is not a special occasion. This is another case where the outsourcing of our food preparation to corporations has gotten us into trouble. It's made formerly expensive or time-consuming foods, everything from fried chicken and French fries to pastries and ice cream, easy and readily accessible. Frying chicken is so much trouble that people didn't used to make it unless they had guests coming over and a lot of time to prepare. The amount of work involved kept the frequency of indulgence in check. These special occasion foods offer some of the great pleasures of life, so we shouldn't deprive ourselves of them. But the sense of occasion needs to be restored. One way is to start making these foods yourself. If you bake dessert yourself, you won't go to that much trouble every day. Another is to limit your consumption of such foods to weekends or social occasions. Some people follow a so-called S policy: no snacks, no seconds, no sweets, except on days that begin with the letter S. That's a great rule. I have a no dessert rule unless it's a Sunday or first class feast day. That's just me. You can make your own rules. That's the whole point, is he gives you these guidelines so that you can adapt them to your own life. Rule number 8, avoid food products that make health claims. This sounds counterintuitive, but consider, for a product to carry a health claim on its package, it must first have a package. So right off the bat, it's more likely to be processed rather than a whole food. Then, only the big food manufacturers have the wherewithal to secure FDA-approved health claims for their products and then trumpet them to the world. Generally, it is the products of modern food science that make the boldest health claims, and these are often founded on incomplete and often bad science. Don't forget that margarine, one of the first industrial foods to claim it was more healthful than the traditional food it replaced, turned out to contain trans fats that give people heart attacks. The healthiest food in the supermarket, the fresh produce, doesn't boast about its healthfulness because the growers don't have the budget or the packaging. Don't take the silence of the yams as a sign they have nothing valuable to say about your health. The yam lobby isn't working hard enough to sell yams. Rule 12. Shop the peripheries of the supermarket and stay out of the middle. Now, speaking for the United States, Singapore, and France, 3 countries in which I've lived for extended amounts of time, I would say New Zealand and Switzerland as well. The shape of the supermarket is such that bread, milk, vegetables, other dairy, they're on the outside, and the aisles in the middle contain processed food. So when he's saying the peripheries of the supermarket, he's talking about this U-shape, that if you do go into a supermarket, if you have to, just go around, that's where all the food is. Everything else inside is food products, which you may or may not need. Pasta, for example, is a classic food product. Most supermarkets are laid out the same way. Processed food products dominate the center aisles of the store, while the cases of mostly fresh food, produce, meat and fish, dairy, line the walls. If you keep to the edges of the store, you'll be much more likely to wind up with real food in your shopping cart. The strategy is not foolproof, however, since things like high fructose corn syrup have crept into the dairy case under the cover of flavored yogurts and the like. And it's a funny thing about flavored yogurts is people think that they're still healthy if they have all of the sugar and all of this other thing, all these other things added to it. The best yogurt is the one that's plain, unflavored, and hopefully potentially Greek or something else where you've got some proactive cultures in it, not just this industrial yogurt that doesn't taste like anything. Rule 21. It's not food if it's called by the same name in every language. Think Big Mac, Cheetos, or Pringles. If you're enjoying this content, consider hitting like or subscribe. It's a free way for others to learn about the channel, and it's a way for you to make sure you get other reviews like this one. Rule 22. Eat mostly plants, especially leaves. Scientists may disagree on what's so good about plants. The antioxidants, the fiber, the omega-3 fatty acids, but they do agree that they're probably really good for you and certainly can't hurt. There are scores of studies demonstrating that a diet rich in vegetables and fruits reduces the risk of dying from all the Western diseases. In countries where people eat a pound or more of vegetables and fruits a day, the rate of cancer is half what it is in the United States. Also, by eating a diet that is primarily plant-based, you'll be consuming far fewer calories, since plant foods, with the exception of seeds, including grains and nuts, are typically less energy dense than the other things you eat, and consuming fewer calories protects against many chronic diseases. Vegetarians are notably healthier than carnivores, and they live longer. I'm not a vegetarian, for the record. Rule 24. Eating what stands on one leg, mushrooms and plant foods, is better than eating what stands on two legs, fowl, which is better than eating what stands on four legs, cows, pigs, and other mammals. This Chinese proverb offers a good summary of traditional wisdom regarding the relative healthfulness of different kinds of food, though it inexplicably leaves out the very healthful and entirely legless fish. Well, you can't do everything with a proverb, but I generally agree with this in terms of proportion of things. We can't eat as beautiful and wonderful as lamb and steak and duck are. You can't only have that all the time. It has to be balanced with other things. Rule 25, something when I first read this book, probably, more than 10 years ago now, I incorporated it immediately, and it's always helped to guide my cooking since that time. If I haven't mentioned it, this book comes from my all-time list back there. I'm slowly working through that on this channel. But once I read this rule, I immediately applied it. The idea that a healthy plate of food will feature several different colors is a good example of an old wives' tale about food that turns out to be good science too. The colors of many vegetables reflect the different antioxidant phytochemicals they contain: anthocyanins, polyphenols, flavonoids, carotenoids. Many of these chemicals help protect against chronic diseases, but each in a slightly different way. So the best protection comes from a diet containing as many different phytochemicals as possible. So when you can, in season, have a colorful plate. Rule 26, drink the spinach water. Another bit of traditional wisdom with good science behind it: the water in which vegetables are cooked is rich in vitamins and other healthful plant chemicals. Save it for soup or add it to sauces. Rule 27, eat animals that have themselves eaten well. The diet of the animals we eat strongly influences the nutritional quality and healthfulness of the food we get from them, whether it is meat or milk or eggs. This should be self-evident, yet it is a truth routinely overlooked by the industrial food chain in its quest to produce vast quantities of cheap animal protein. That quest has changed the diet of most of our food animals in ways that have often damaged their health and healthfulness. We feed animals a high-energy diet of grain to make them grow quickly, even in the case of ruminants that have evolved to eat grass. But even food animals that can tolerate grain are much healthier when they have access to green plants, and so it turns out are their meat and eggs. The food from these animals will contain much healthier types of fat, more omega-3s, less omega-6s, as well as appreciably higher levels of vitamins and antioxidants. For the same reason, meat from wild animals is particularly nutritious. It's worth looking for pastured animal foods in the market and paying the premium prices they typically command if you can. Rule 28. If you have the space, buy a freezer. When you find a good source of pastured meat, you'll want to buy it in quantity. Buying meat in bulk, a quarter of a steer, say, or a whole hog, is one way to eat well on a budget. Dedicated freezers are surprisingly inexpensive to buy and to operate because they aren't opened nearly as often as the one in your fridge. A freezer will also enable you to put up food from the farmer's market and encourage you to buy produce in bulk at the height of its season, when it will be most abundant and therefore cheapest. And freezing does not significantly diminish the nutritional value of produce. Rule 37. The whiter the bread, the sooner you'll be dead. This rather blunt bit of cross-cultural grandmotherly advice, passed down from both Jewish and Italian grandmothers, suggests that the health risks of white flour have been popularly recognized for many years. As far as the body is concerned, white flour is not much different from sugar. Unless supplemented, it offers none of the good things, fiber, B vitamins, healthy fats, in whole grains. It's little more than a shot of glucose. Large spikes of glucose are inflammatory and wreak havoc on our insulin metabolism. Eat whole grains and minimize your consumption of white flour. Recent research indicates that the grandmothers who lived by this rule were right. People who eat lots of whole grains tend to be healthier and to live longer. Rule 41. Eat more like the French, or the Japanese, or the Italians, or the Greeks. People who eat according to the rules of a traditional food culture are generally healthier than those of us eating a modern Western diet of processed foods. Any traditional diet will do. If it were not a healthy diet, the people who follow it wouldn't still be around. True, food cultures are embedded in societies and economies and ecologies, and some of them travel better than others. Inuit, not so well as Italian. And for those who don't know, Inuit is a tribe of the Eskimos who live up north near the Arctic Circle. So obviously, if you're living in that climate, their traditional diet's very different from the Italian diet, which has conquered the world. It's all over the place. In borrowing from a food culture, pay attention to how a culture eats as well as to what it eats. In the case of the French paradox, for example, it may not be the dietary nutrients that keep the French healthy, lots of saturated fat and white flour, as much as their food habits. Small portions, eaten at leisurely communal meals, no second helpings, or snacking. Pay attention, too, to the combinations of foods in traditional cultures. In Latin America, corn is traditionally cooked with lime and eaten with beans. What would otherwise be a nutritionally deficient staple becomes the basis of a healthy, balanced diet. The beans supply amino acids lacking in corn, and the lime makes niacin available. Cultures that took corn from Latin America without the beans or the lime wound up with serious nutritional deficiencies such as pellagra. Traditional diets are more than the sum of their food parts. Rule 45. Eat less. This is probably the most unwelcome advice of all, but in fact the scientific case for eating a lot less than we currently do, regardless of whether you are overweight, is compelling. Calorie restriction has repeatedly been shown to slow aging in animals, and many researchers believe it offers the single strongest link between diet and cancer prevention. We eat much more than our bodies need to be healthy, and the excess wreaks havoc, and not just on our weight. But we are not the first people in history to grapple with the special challenges posed by food abundance, and previous cultures have devised various ways to promote the idea of moderation. The rules that follow offer a few proven strategies. Rule 46. Stop eating before you're full. And interestingly, this is a classic in Catholic spiritual teaching as well, to not always eat until you're absolutely full. There's a spiritual component to the scientific and the cultural advice. Nowadays, we think it is normal and right to eat until you are full, but many cultures specifically advise stopping well before that point is reached. The Japanese have a saying, hara hachibu, counseling people to stop eating when they are 80% full. The Ayurvedic tradition in India advises eating until you are 75% full. The Chinese specify 70%. And the Prophet Muhammad, the so-called Prophet Muhammad, described a full belly as one that contained 1/3 food and 1/3 liquid and 1/3 air, i.e. nothing. Note the relatively narrow range specified in all this advice, somewhere between 67 and 80% of capacity. Take your pick. There's also a German expression that says, you need to tie off the sack before it gets completely full. And how many of us have grandparents who talk of leaving the table a little bit hungry? Here again, the French have something to teach us. To say I'm hungry in French, you say j'ai faim, I have hunger. And when you're finished, you do not say you are full, but je n'ai plus faim, I have no more hunger. That is a completely different way of thinking about satiety. So ask yourself not, am I full? But, is my hunger gone? That moment will arrive several bites sooner. Boy, if there were only one rule in this whole book that Americans could learn, it would be that one. Rule 49, eat slowly. Not just so you'll be more likely to know when to stop. Eat slowly enough to savor your food. You'll need less of it to feel satisfied. If it is a food experience rather than mere calories you're after, the slower you eat, the more of an experience you will have. There is an Indian proverb that gets at this idea. Drink your food, chew your drink. In other words, eat slowly enough and chew thoroughly enough to liquefy your food and move your drink around in your mouth to thoroughly taste it before swallowing. The recommendation sounds a bit clinical perhaps, but try following it at least to the point of fully appreciating what's in your mouth. Another strategy, encoded in a table manner that's all been but forgotten, put down your fork between bites. Rule 57, don't get your fuel from the same place your car does. American gas stations now make more money inside selling food and cigarettes than they do outside selling gasoline. But consider what kind of food this is. Except perhaps for the milk and water, it's all highly processed, imperishable snack foods and extravagantly sweetened soft drinks in hefty 20-ounce bottles. Gas stations have become processed corn stations, ethanol outside for your car, and high fructose corn syrup inside for you. Don't eat here. Rule 59, try not to eat alone. Americans are increasingly eating in solitude, although there is some research to suggest that light eaters will eat more when they dine with others, perhaps because they spend more time at the table. For people prone to overeating, communal meals tend to limit consumption, if only because we're less likely to stuff ourselves when others are watching. We also tend to eat more slowly since there's usually more going on at the table than ingestion. This is precisely why so much food marketing is designed to encourage us to eat in front of the TV or in the car. When we eat alone, we eat more. But regulating appetite is only part of the story. The shared meal elevates eating from a biological process of fueling the body to a ritual of family and community. And that's something that I think Europeans were very shocked at when I would share that a lot of Americans, they don't go out for lunch when they're at their office. They may just eat at their desk while watching YouTube and spill food on their keyboards. And while unfortunately this is a trend that's starting to catch on in parts of European workplaces that are tied to American corporations, most Europeans are pretty horrified at this idea, rightfully so. And finally, Rule 64, one of my favorite rules in the whole book. Break the rules once in a while. Obsessing over food rules is bad for your happiness and probably for your health too. Our experience over the past few decades suggests that dieting and worrying too much about nutrition has made us no healthier or slimmer. Cultivating a relaxed attitude toward food is important. There will be special occasions when you will want to throw those rules out the window. All will not be lost, especially if you don't throw out rule number 60. What matters is not the special occasion but the everyday practice, the default habits that govern your eating on a typical day. All things in moderation, it is often said, but we should never forget the wise addendum, sometimes attributed to Oscar Wilde, including moderation. All things in moderation, including moderation. So, Food Rules by Michael Pollan, wonderful short book, can't recommend it enough. It's been on my all-time list for years, and it will continue to stay there. If you'd like to get a copy for yourself, there's a link in the description. That's one of the ways that you can support this channel. A free and easy way you can support the channel. Hit like, subscribe, share this with people who might be interested in learning more about how to eat better without making it too complicated or having some miracle diet to rely on. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, there's links to PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee below. Below that, Patreon and YouTube membership. If you want to support me on an ongoing basis, you'll get early access to reviews like this one. You'll have a chance to chat with me behind the scenes, and you'll get access to videos that I don't upload to the general public, just for my members and patrons. If you'd like to sponsor a video, you can navigate to my wish list. My Amazon wish list has links to all sorts of books. You'll see some just focused on Palestine. That's for my Palestine bookshelf project. feel free to go check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, you'll see other books that are related probably to this channel. Buy a book, send it my way, and I will do my best to review it in a timely manner. Until next time, enjoy your reading.